From the Office of the Vice President of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, we welcome you to the second annual Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Decolonization Week, EDID Week. We are here to continue the work of uplifting efforts to challenge oppression, as well as acknowledging the ongoing and future work required to build a more just campus, community, and world. My name is Kate Hargreaves, my pronouns are she, her, and I am honored to be part of EDID Week behind the scenes as an administrative assistant in the office of the VP EDI, and to have the opportunity to introduce this afternoon's session. So before we get started, I would like to highlight some additional events that are happening later today. We will be hosting a virtual presentation on Teams as well about migrant worker healthcare in Windsor-Essex County, and that's today from 3 to 4 p.m., and that'll be presented by Aya El Hashemi and Team 14 for Migrant Workers Health. And also tonight, you can check out the trivia night with the Black Leadership and Excellence program, which is happening from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. in person at the Katzman Lounge in Vanier Hall, which is the residence hall. And topics include Black historical figures, Black hair, famous Black musicians, knowledge of facts surrounding African and Caribbean countries, and famous Black athletes. So snacks and beverages are also going to be provided, as well as prizes. So definitely check that out as well. And to register for the events and for more information, you can visit uwindsor.ca/VPEDI. Before I introduce our speakers for this afternoon, I just want to first offer a land acknowledgement. The University of Windsor is built on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, which include the Ojibwa, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. I acknowledge and thank the traditional custodians of the land for their wisdom and connection to this place, and we invite you into a tradition with us of acknowledging and remembering whose territory you are on, wherever you are joining us from. This afternoon's event is about helping the 2SLGBTQIA+ community thrive. And just to let you know that the chat, microphone, and video functions have been turned off for attendees of the session. However, we do welcome questions using the Q&A function of Microsoft Teams. So you can feel free to leave questions and comments in that Q&A box located at the top of your Teams window. Teams also has automatic transcription and captioning functions, and participants can use those by selecting the 3 dots in the menu and then selecting either language and speech or accessibility and turning on the captioning or transcriptions as needed. So now to introduce today's facilitators, Ash O'Neill. She/they is a learning specialist in the Office of Open Learning, where they have worked in various capacities since early 2017. Initially impassioned by the desire to help marginalized people live better lives, they completed their honors BA and MA in psychology and a postgraduate certificate in autism and behavioral science. Through their experiences with the Center for Teaching and Learning and subsequent PhD internship with the Office of Open Learning, Ash began their journey into educational development, recognizing the power of the field to make a difference in the lives of both students and instructors in higher education. Their personal research interests include the measurement of and discourses around student success and how these ideas intersect with individual characteristics and social variables. Excited about the educational opportunities afforded by technology and critical pedagogy, they now engage in the Scholarship of Online Teaching and Learning and manage the University of Windsor's Peer Assisted Learning Sessions, or PALS program, which strategically supports students enrolled in historically difficult gateway courses. Ash is also a co-chair of the UWin Pride Committee. Jocelyn Laredo, she/her, is an accessibility advisor and an interim bounce back facilitator focusing on retention. She started her career in post-secondary and residence life, working with first-year students and upper-year leaders within the resident system. She is always learning and taking courses to expand her knowledge in the latest trends within the post-secondary environment. Recently, this quest for knowledge has led her to research more on 2SLGBTQIA+ needs within a living and learning environment and the challenges that students face while accessing different areas on campus. Jocelyn is also the co-chair and one of the founders of the UN Pride Committee and a care champion on the University of Windsor campus. And Anne Ruzinski, she/her, is the sexual violence education specialist at the Office of Sexual Violence Prevention, Resistance, and Support. Her role centers around providing educational experiences about sexual violence, consent, and support at the University of Windsor. Anne is also responsible for the implementation of the Flip the Script program with EAAA at the University of Windsor, and works with Wendo Women's Self-Defense to bring their programming to our campus, and runs the Prevent Resist Support podcast in addition to social media presence for the Prevent Resist Support campaign. And she is also the co-chair of the Windsor Pride Committee. So without anything further from me, I am honored and delighted to welcome Ash, Jocelyn, and Anne. And I am excited to hear the presentation. So take it away. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. Excellent introductions. I apologize that my intro bio is so long, but thank you for getting it all in there.
It was great. It was wonderful to learn more about you.
All right, so again, you don't have to read this because Kate just did, but I just would like to again introduce myself. My name is Ash O'Neill and I use she, they pronouns. I am sitting in my home office with dirty blonde hair and turquoise glasses and a fun button-down shirt. I would like to situate myself as a white settler who grew up in the small rural town of Cottam outside of Essex and Kingsville. I am currently in the town of LaSalle, which is Treaty 35 territory, signed between the Crown and the Huron-Wendat peoples. I would also like to acknowledge that the University of Windsor sits on Treaty 2 land belonging to the Three Fires Confederacy, which includes the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples, to whom I am grateful for the traditional caretaking of this land that provides us life. As a settler, I educate myself by reading books by Indigenous authors and speaking with Indigenous knowledge keepers so I can better equip myself with the knowledge and tools necessary for the decolonization of our institution and our community. Finally, I would like to acknowledge all of the trans and queer folks, specifically queer people of color, who have paved the way for where we are now. It is because of them that we can celebrate our identities and continue along the trajectory of creating safer spaces for everyone.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anne. If you were here yesterday, I also spoke then, so sorry to Kate for having to read my long bio twice. Thank you for doing that. My pronouns are she and her. I work here at the Office of Sexual Violence Prevention, Resistance, and Support. I'm going to keep my intro really short because I think Kate and Ash already said all of the wonderful things that I would want to say about this work, so thank you for that.
Hi everyone, I'm Jocelyn Laredo. I use she, her pronouns. I currently work in the Office of Student Experience and Leadership as the Bounce Back Coordinator, but typically my role is in Student Accessibility Services. I am at home today. There's a bookshelf behind me. I have dirty brown, blonde, highlighted hair, and I'm wearing a gray blazer.
Okay, so just as we get started, this session will be a lot of us talking, but we are building in some opportunities for engagement. As Kate mentioned, there is the Q&A option through Microsoft Teams that you can use if you have thoughts or questions that come up periodically throughout the session. But I would just like to kind of remind everyone about some of the ways in which we can be together. So we want this to be a space for honesty and authenticity. And, because these are difficult topics that come up, we want you to be able to reflect on your emotions, but, try not to make everything about your own self and your own experiences, but recognize those of others as well. Respecting each other, being open-minded, and remembering to care for yourselves. We often kind of think about caring for others, at least in our type of work, but we have to remember to care for ourselves too. So if you have to stand or stretch while you're part of this presentation, drinking your water, getting your coffee, petting your dog, touching or holding something that helps calm you, etc. Please remember to take care of yourself. And then just finally, we don't want anyone to make any discriminatory comments that may be harmful to everyone who's in this space with us. So to get us started, we have this Menti meter. So if you can either use the QR code, scan it with your phone and participate that way, or you can go to menti.com and enter the code that you see there, which I think Kate was also going to put in the Q&A so everyone can see it on an ongoing basis. But every time we come back to this, the code will also reappear if you happen to lose it or what have you. So we'll come back to this 3 times. And what we want you to do right now, and I'm just going to bring up the Menti itself on my computer, is to enter any questions that you may have before we get started. So we really just wanted sorry. We want people to feel comfortable to ask any questions that you might have, and see if we might be able to address some of these as we go through this presentation. And if we're unable to address them through this conversation or presentation, then we can keep those questions in mind for future sessions that we might be offering through UN Pride. So let us know if you have trouble getting into the Mentimeter. But feel free to enter any questions that you have in there. And this is anonymous, so feel free, because no one will know who is asking the questions. I'll just give a minute for folks to enter into there. We go. Okay. How are you all so awesome? Okay, well, I mean, I don't know how we answer that question. How can we support the campus community? Oh, other people think we're awesome. All right. Hopefully you still think that at the end of this session and continue to think that about us. You all are awesome too. We're so grateful that you are here, taking the time out of your day, having your lunch with us, or whatever you're doing today. How to best support a child preteen. Ooh, that's interesting. And I think that this is part of a conversation that's happening more widely around campus, around like engagement with folks prior to getting here. Whether that's, you know, recruitment purposes or just outreach purposes, and getting even younger than high school, because oftentimes we think about outreach in terms of like grade 11, 12, because they're the most imminent, you know, population that would be coming to us, but actually getting into like the grade schools and stuff and starting outreach there. So I don't know that we'll offer actual advice about this today, but it's an interesting question for us to keep in mind for sure. Do we know if there's a support group that is available for parents and parents of children? Ooh, interesting. And that might come up later when I ask about developing a community on campus for faculty and staff. In our publications. Ooh, okay. Academic questions. I assume this, and if not, was about the support group. So we can, and especially if you're someone who wants to do something like actionable, we are all about that at UN Pride Committee. So you can also feel free to reach out to us, and we will give you our contact information at the end of this session as well. Navigating queer identity while acknowledging privilege of being assumed straight. I think that we can understand that and identify with that as some of our identities present as differently than what we may feel or identify as ourselves. And supporting the queer community as an ally. Excellent. All right. So I think that some of these questions will be addressed throughout our presentation. And where they are not, we can try to see if we have time at the end of the session to talk about them, or to develop future sessions or you know, engagement opportunities to address these things. Okay, so I will just give a kind of a brief overview, because there has been a lot of change over the past little while about, you know, a lot of things about all in marginalized communities, not just 2SLGBTQIA, but we've seen a lot of change happen, especially since the pandemic, in terms of acknowledging and acting towards social justice issues in general. But one thing that has changed more recently is the evolution of the pride flag and the acronyms that we use. So, you know, traditionally you may have heard LGB, LGBT, LGBTQ, but now we've made an intentional effort to use the acronym 2SLGBTQIA+. We've spelled it out here on the slide for you. where 2S indicates two-spirit, and we have put it at the front of the acronym because we would like to acknowledge the contributions of Indigenous two-spirit people who have been in existence for as long as people have been alive, and all of the work that has been done that is often erased in our colonial histories, and putting them at the forefront and recognizing their contributions. Then we have the LGBT, which is kind of the most historically present acronym for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender folks. The Q can indicate queer or questioning. For example, I identify as queer because it is the kind of biggest umbrella that I can see myself fitting into, because other labels just don't really work for me. It can also stand for questioning for folks who just aren't really sure where they might fit into this right now. And then we have intersex and asexual, and these two letters are often left off of the acronym, and we want to make sure that they're included because they're often also erased. Intersex folks span from have a variety of characteristics, intersexuality, and we have learned more recently that because there are forms of intersexuality that that are not visible, that there's actually a percentage of folks in the world that are intersex that is comparable to the percentage of folks in the world that are redheaded. So this is much more common and much more frequent than you might believe it to be, and it needs to be emphasized when we're talking about our queer community in general. And asexuality, which often represents folks who don't experience a sexual attraction towards people, but that does not mean that they might not be romantically attracted or socially attracted to folks. So just recognizing that we have a whole kind of galaxy of different identities within the 2SLGBTQIA community, which sometimes people refer to as the alphabet community or the rainbow community, etc. And then over on the right, you'll also see the evolution of the pride flag itself. And again, we will be sending out these slides after the presentation.
Okay, I think it's me. I'm back. Anyways, I couldn't see anything on the screen, so I had to gracefully exit and come back. So now I can see the things that I need to see. So a little bit about the UN Pride Committee. This committee is made up of 2SLGBTQIA folks and accomplices, which is our new favorite word for allies. We work together to foster social, academic, and personal growth for all individuals in the Windsor community through support, awareness, promotion, and education regarding the 2SLGBTQIA issues, rights, and experiences. And so we have, given quite a few presentations. We have met one-on-one with students who are experiencing some challenges. We've reached out to instructors who are like, how do I navigate this little challenge in the classroom? And so right now, the UN Pride Committee is working on some online training modules for folks to educate them on how to be a better ally or accomplice. And this will come with a certification to you to display in your offices or in your spaces. And the hopeful completion date is for fall 2023. This will be a course that you can work on at your own pace. It'll be 100% online, obviously with support from myself and Ash along the way. The UN Pride Committee is collaborating with different groups on campus to deliver educational presentations on different aspects pertaining to the 2SLGBTQIA folks and the challenges they face. And then to talk a little bit about Thrive, as I know there's some confusion out there, Thrive is working, UN Pride is working in collaboration with Thrive on processes for name changes, pronouns, and prefixes within the internal campus information systems, as well as working with other institutions around creating educational information for 2SLGBTQIA students to navigate different areas on campus. And we're going to get into that kind of collaboration more so into the presentation. Like now. Okay, So Thriving on Campus initially was a study put out by Wilfrid Laurier University, and they collaborated with other Ontario institutions to look at, where are the 2SLGBTQIA folks? How are they identifying? What kind of services and supports are available? And so they put out this survey for students to fill out. And so it was guided by an advisory committee representing students and 2SLGBTQIA plus organizations and the student affairs field, and is led by an interdisciplinary research team that involves student research assistants from social work, psychology, and other areas. So this was a province-wide mixed method study guided by an advisory committee. And the whole idea was to promote understanding of the experiences, well-being, and academic development of queer folks and students throughout the province, and inform the development of services, programs, and policies to promote 2SLGBTQIA student inclusion, well-being, and academic success. And so phase one, as you folks saw, is well underway. Phase two, the survey has already been done. Phase three, follow-up interviews are completed, and phase four, regional and provincial webinars. That's kind of where we're at right now. And so why do we need this project? Little is known about the experiences and well-being of the queer folks on our university campuses in Canada. Therefore, research is needed to understand how to best foster their acceptance, well-being, and academic development. By providing a holistic picture of the experiences of 2SLGBTQIA plus folks in the province and student groups, service providers and policymakers and researchers will better understand how campus climate can positively and negatively impact these students and gain insights about the factors that can foster resilience. Ultimately, the research findings will aid service providers and policymakers to make more effectively supportive diverse students through evidence-based policies and services. And so this report, sorry, my words, this report will be available to folks at the end of the presentation and was shared in the advertising of this program today. So you can see here in this slide that there were 3,856 2SLGBTQ plus identifying students who took part in the surveys, and 201 participants from the University of Windsor, which is like really fantastic. So yeah, pretty much what this is telling us. Actually, let me in order. Okay, the demographics. Okay, so the demographics of this survey. So this is everybody. This is not our campus, our University of Windsor campus, but everybody. So it just shows that there were many different folks and different intersectionality points within. So students didn't identify within the queer spectrum, but also self-identified themselves in different ways as well, being within the BIPOC community, religion, disabled, and age.
So this breaks down the sexual identities that were reported by the 200 or so UWindsor participants. But what's important to note when looking at this is that there's always a response bias, and that the UWindsor students represented here do not represent the full spectrum of queer identities on our campus. For example, while no one identified as Two-Spirit, we know anecdotally that our campus does have folks that use that label for themselves. What is interesting, though, is the amount of people identifying outside of the gay and lesbian identities often associated with being queer. And this could be a sign of the times where folks are more willing to embrace fluidity and recognize that sexuality is not as cut and dry as we have been made to believe for most of our lives. So you see here that, bisexuality comprised 42% of the population, and bisexuality and pansexuality are often related, and folks might use one or both of those labels to describe themselves. Whereas bisexuality is usually used to describe attraction to both men and women. Pansexuality refers to those who are attracted to any and all genders, though those who identify as bisexual might also be attracted to folks outside of the biological male, female, sex assigned at birth spectrum. Then we have the gender identities from our respondents. So again, here we see that it was mostly cisgender women who participated. That is not that surprising because often we see in research that women are more likely to participate in this type of research than others. I saw this all the time in doing other types of research as well, not just those with the 2SLGBTQIA plus community. But again, it's important to note that two-spirit and intersex identities are missing from this graph. Although participants could have identified as two-spirit and didn't in our case, it appears as though intersex was not an option when asking about gender identities, which solidifies the importance of including intersex in our acronym because it is often erased. Then we have the kind of the gender identities along the spectrum of transness. So this isn't just UWindsor, this was the whole survey sample again. But what we see here is the representation of the variability within the wide spectrum of transness. You may be familiar with the sayings, trans men are men, trans women are women, which is important for the way the world sees trans people as something as an identity that is legitimate, but it is equally important to note that transness can be central to a person's identity. So here you see, for example, that 19% of trans people identified as a woman, not specifically as a trans woman, but then we also do have the identities of trans woman and trans feminine, which can be central to someone's identity in that they might prefer not to refer to themselves as simply a man or a woman. But then we also see this huge spectrum within the non-binary area. So we see non-binary, queer, gender fluid, gender queer, non-conforming, demigender, two-spirit, etc. And this is basically just illustrating that it's not. We don't have even really one spectrum or continuum. We have like kind of this galaxy, this whole idea of various genders, various sexual identities that exist outside of what we have normally thought of. So for example, myself, I would often be viewed as a cis-presenting woman, but I identify more within the genderqueer or gender fluid labels, although I do tend to reject labels for myself.
Joss. Okay, so survey participants, I thought this was very interesting to see that we didn't, oftentimes when we look at these types of stats, it's the first thing that comes to mind is our Faculty of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences being the folks that participate. However, it shows here that 28% of the students who participated in the survey are from the STEM area, so the science, technology, engineering, and math. And social sciences were 23. So I just thought I would include this slide to show folks that, yes, it was, mostly full-time students who participated, but we did get folks from all areas of study to participate in the study. And so I thought that was very interesting.
So now we'll get into kind of like some of the results. So we do have some promising results in that UWindsor did come out ahead or slightly ahead or roughly equal to universities of comparable size and with all of Ontario. So on this slide, we see campus climate according to the trans participants. So participants' perceptions of collective attitudes and treatment towards trans people at UWindsor were significantly more positive than other universities. And this was in 2019, before we really started, a lot of the crux of what we're doing as UN Pride now, because it was July of 2019 that the UN Pride Committee began in an effort to first enter the Windsor Pride Fest parade. And then from there, we've just kind of grown and started to develop more as a committee. But as we see here that, generally the views were approximately neutral, a little bit towards the positive side for safety and collective attitudes. Although we can see here that even though we're above other institutions, we do still have some room for improvement. We also come out ahead so this is folks from LGBTQ, not specifically trans. And so we come out ahead in terms of institutional leadership, but when looking at some of the group differences, some concerning trends appear. For example, students with disabilities were less satisfied with the collective attitudes and treatment of queer students and viewed EDI policies less favorably. In addition, racialized students felt significantly less safe based on their sexual identity and gender expression. So we see here that intersectionality really matters. It's not just about a person's queerness, but about their the other parts of their identity as well. So you might be queer and disabled, or Black and queer, or Indigenous and queer, etc. And here I'm just using the word queer to refer to the broad spectrum, because the acronym can be a lot to say sometimes. So then we have some results on the connectedness and belonging. So again, we were mostly neutral or slightly positive. And I call the slightly positive like a hesitancy. Like, it's like, it's not negative. I don't feel negatively about this, but I'm not like, yeah, they're doing great. So it's like, we're mostly neutral, a little bit of positivity. So on the feelings of connectedness, our participants reported an average of 5 out of 7 and 3.4 out of feelings of belonging. This again was comparable to other universities, and there were no statistical differences between us and either universities of comparable size or Ontario as a whole. Then we think about microaggressions. And if you're not familiar with the term microaggressions, this term often is used to refer to things that aren't, intentionally malicious comments or actions that are meant to denigrate someone, but things that people just might say or do without realizing the harm that it's doing to the person on the receiving end. And Jocelyn will talk a little bit about intent versus impact a little bit later. But with these microaggressions, and I will note that, when you're involved in EDI type of work, we often see that people who are the receivers of microaggressions report that there's nothing really that feels micro about it. We consider it micro because it's not like a huge outwardly malicious thing, but it doesn't really feel micro to the person that it's happening to. So what we found, these are specifically from our participants. The 74% of trans participants indicated that they saw negative messages about trans people on social media by those within the university setting. 71% indicated experience with forms or documentation with only male and female options. And 71% thought that it seemed on our campus that it's okay to make jokes about trans people. Over 80% indicated hearing someone say "that's so gay" when describing something negative, or the phrase "no homo," and receiving limited sexual health information. So that's sexual health information that is really limited to the heterosexual experience and is not inclusive of the experiences of trans and queer folks. Some of the other outcomes were that reported by our participants was that it's difficult to change records. So this includes names, genders, pronouns, and recently salutations or prefixes. Students felt most welcomed and respected at the Women's Center, and the least welcomed and respected, sorry for the typo there, the least welcomed and respected at student orientation. So this is quite concerning because student orientation is often one of the first experiences that our students have when they come to our institution. So in that first week, if they're not feeling welcomed and respected at like welcome events, that is somewhat concerning. So this was in 2019. So a lot of things may have changed since then. And at this past Welcome Week, like in September, we actually held a Queer Eye on Campus tour where we actually highlighted specific areas on campus, specific processes, et cetera, for queer folks who were attending the orientation. So again, lots has changed, but it is important to note these things that were reported by our students. And then some areas that weren't necessarily the best or the worst, but there's definite room for improvement is the knowledgeability about needs, the skills for providing inclusive service, and this was across advising, counseling, et cetera, and then overall institutional satisfaction, where we were slightly lower than the average for the province and for comparable universities, where it was a 5 out of 7. So, slightly positive, but could do better. So now again, I'm going to go back to that Mentimeter, and I see more questions coming in, so that's awesome. But I'm going to skip ahead to the next one, which is, what of this data sticks out to you? What did you notice in presenting? Now, again, this is a snapshot. Maybe some of you read the report and you might have other insights into that, but is there anything that sticks out to you from this? There's work to be done, indeed. And this is a word cloud. So as people add things, if you have the same words, they will become bigger. Like work to be done just got bigger. More resources required. And resources in terms of, like physical resources as well as personnel resources, which also means money resources. We need that financial backing from the institution to make these things happen, right? Diversity and intersectionality. Ooh, attitudinal barriers. Not offside of desk. Yeah, if you come to a lot of our Pride workshops, you probably hear us talk about the fact that all of us are doing this off the side of our desk, which, service work often is. Fortunately, as a faculty member, service work is incorporated into my job description, but for those in QP roles like Jocelyn and Anne, or actually Anne's management, but for neither one of them is service like this actually part of their job. And so it, makes it a bit more difficult to get things done. It doesn't take away from our dedication to the work, just knowing that, having dedicated resources could really go a long way in helping to build an inclusive campus. Re-education. Yeah, and re-education, relates to what we see a lot in the work that I'm doing in the Office of Open Learning, is that unlearning piece, right? Like if we have to relearn, we have to unlearn a lot of the things that have been socialized into us for most of our lives.
And I think too, Paul, that's where a lot of these new modules that are coming out, it will help folks with like the unlearn and the relearn kind of ideas as well. So that's one space that we're definitely zeroing on.
Shared responsibility, I love that. And I like that someone put some are easily solved, because you do see from some of these, things that there are some things that it's like, okay, well, we can just do that. That would take a matter of days or weeks, where some are like, whole systemic efforts. And we will get into some of the things that we are doing that are happening around campus from various groups, including ours. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for participating in this. I believe we'll come back to it at the end. So what can we do from this data, and what can we do? Sorry, what did you notice and what can we do? So I'm just leaving this kind of as a rhetorical question right now, because we're going to come back to it after Jocelyn gives us some more contextualizing information around oppression and intersectionality.
Okay. So oppression, I'm sure as most people know, I'm just going to define it. Oppression causes deep suffering by trying to decide whether one oppression is worse than others is problematic. It diminishes lived experiences and divides communities that should be working together. Many people experience abuse based on multiple social identities. Often oppressions overlap to cause people even more hardship. This overlapping of oppression group is referred to as intersectionality. And so we saw the word intersectionality come up a few times in the Mentimeter, which is fantastic. Okay, so this is Kimberly Crenshaw. Anything that she writes, I have enjoyed immensely. So she talks a lot about intersectionality, and that it's an analytic framework that addresses how interlocking systems of power impact those who are most marginalized in society. And so, when we look at the definition of intersectionality, and how it affects the work that is currently being done on, like, how does it affect the work that's currently being done on campus? Are there assumptions being made about the supports that students need? What other resources are needed on campus to support all marginalized identities? And who is being discriminated against, and who is experiencing microaggressions? So we know, based on the history of our institution, that there are many folks that fall into these challenges. And I just think that the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion is doing a fabulous job of bringing these things to the forefront and creating a space for students, faculty, and staff to come and talk about some of the challenges that they're experiencing. So I just want to talk really quickly about the cycle of socialization. I had to practice that word a couple times because it was coming out all weird in my mouth. But the cycle of socialization helps us understand the way in which we are socialized to play certain roles, how we are affected by issues of oppression, and how we help maintain an oppressive system based upon power. The cycle is comprised of 3 arrows, 3 circles, and a core center. Each of these components represent the following. So the beginning of the cycle, depicted by the first circle, represents the situation into which we were born. We have no control over this. We are also born without bias, assumptions, or questions. We are either lucky to be born into privileged situations or unlucky to be born into underprivileged situations. The first arrow represents the fact that our socialization process begins immediately. We are given a pink blanket if we're a girl and a blue if we're a boy. The rules and norms are already in a place that we are subtly, and in many cases not so subtly, are made aware of the rewards of conforming and the consequences of rebelling. The second circle represents the institutions that help shape our views and beliefs and help instill within our prejudice or acceptance. The second arrow represents the way in which which the instilling of ideas, beliefs, and behaviors reinforce the cycle of oppression. Behaving differently is not as simple as most of us think. We are rewarded for good behavior, conforming to the norms and standards. By the same token, we are punished for behavior, questioning, or rebelling against oppressive societal norms. The third cycle represents the devastating results upon all of us that this self-perpetuated cycle of oppression produces. The final arrow represents a point at which we all arrive, the result of the cycle. We are forced to make decisions, even if that decision is to do nothing. Doing nothing is the easier choice, especially for those who benefit from the perpetuation of the cycle. We are all victims in the cycle, and we are all hurt by it. Oppression hurts the oppressed and the oppressor. And finally, it is the wheel that turns or enables any cycle. At the center of the core of this cycle of socialization is fear, misunderstanding, insecurity, and confusion. And so essentially, we're here today as UN Pride and working with the Thrive Committee to try to change some of the outcomes for the cycle of socialization and look at those ignorances, those fears and confusions and insecurities. Okay, it's my favorite part. So I came across this not that long ago in talking with some folks in HR about intent versus impact. And so we've all had situations where, you know, we as the person having a conversation know that our intent is coming from a fabulous place, but we don't recognize sometimes how what we're saying impacts others. And so, I like to look at it as like no one, you know, the ice does not have the intent to hurt us, but the impact of falling hurts. And so also things like, you know, you step on someone's toe, you're the first person to apologize to them, but we don't fully honestly know the impact of how badly we stepped on that person's toe. And so at the end of the day, I just think it's really important when you do make a mistake, you recognize that mistake, you apologize, and you move on.
Okay, so in terms of how intersectionality was addressed in the Thriving on Campus study, because it was focused, the project that was funded was specifically focused on gender and sexuality. It did not specifically address racism, especially in the survey. However, with some follow-up interviews, they were able to identify some areas related to intersectionality, such that it is important to address you know, the student's whole experience as a whole human being. And the fact that there are occurrences of interpersonal and systemic racism that might be experienced differently for those who identify as queer or trans. Some of the interview participants also indicated a need for intersectional spaces and support people. So, you know, not just supporting me as a Black student or as a disabled student, but as a whole person. So going back to that kind of integrated support through, you know, our various areas on campus. But we do acknowledge that a lot has changed since 2019. And if, for example, they got the funding to do this project now, it probably would have integrated a lot more of the intersectionality into its core components because of what we have seen happening in the world since 2019, since 2020, really with the unearthing of mass graves at residential schools, both in Canada and the US, and the ongoing police brutality against the Black community, and ongoing and increased anti-Asian hate as well. So recognizing that these things are happening and it's something that needs to be addressed more. But I did pull a couple of quotes from it was the BIPOC survey. And I know that, you know, not everyone agrees on the use of the word BIPOC. There's some conversation about using racialized or other racially marginalized communities. But these are two quotes that were from students. So I didn't find that I would send students over to health services for counseling, because when you have a white counselor and you have to explain 400 years of colonization before we even get to my problems. That was by an Indigenous Two-Spirit graduate student. And then a Black cisgender gay man who's an undergraduate student indicated, it's not an environment meant for students to succeed. It's an environment for the best. The people who have the most advantages to get ahead, who are, he's indicating, are the best. And being queer and Black is not an advantage in this space. So again, these were general. They didn't indicate which universities these students came from, but I think that these are important messages to get across just in general. So some of the overarching recommendations from Thriving on Campus, fit into kind of like these four major categories. The first is visibility, representation, and leadership. And this is the first thing that we kind of always think of is visibility and representation, but that's not enough. Seeing yourself reflected in leadership and around campus in instructors and people who offer support services is very important, but it's not enough. We need the resources and support specific to helping these students thrive, just like any other student that we support, which involves training for 2SLGBTQIA inclusion from an intersectional lens. So, we can't, we don't always have to go out and find a new person to replace the people who are doing the work, but we can help the people who are here do the work better by supporting and educating them within their roles. And then we get to that holistic kind of system reform, from purse strings to pedagogy is what they call it. So, you have to put your money where your mouth is, kind of like, if we care about this, we have to invest in it. And from the pedagogy perspective, that is something that I'm trying to work on in the Office of Open Learning too. Thinking about different queer pedagogies, feminist pedagogies, anti-racist pedagogies, and how these work to create more inclusive classrooms and learning experiences for our students. So now we'll get into all the things that we're doing, because I see that we have 7 minutes left, which is not a lot of time, but that's okay because we're like towards the end. So this is we're just going to run through kind of the efforts that we're working on campus right now.
Okay, so the Thrive Working Group, right now we are in the process of reviewing academic and institutional forums that ask about gender. We are well underway in that research. And the names and pronouns on the UWindsor system, we've had a lot of support from OREA as well as ITS in figuring all of these things out. So it's well on its way, which is really exciting. OREA and Thrive are working on gender inclusive washrooms across campus, also making sure that students know where they are so that they can use them if they need to. Student health and wellness, reviewing health information provided by health services, which also directly impacts the work that is done in student accessibility services. So that's kind of being shared between both. Ash, what? SH, what?
Student health and wellness. Sorry, I was shortening it.
Thank you. Student health and wellness and student experience to ensure mental health services, academic counseling, and other services are responsive to the needs and identities of our queer students on campus. Anne is doing fabulous work in reviewing gender violence and campus climate policies and initiatives, as well as earlier on in the presentation talking about those sex-related resources that students require, doing a fantastic job on non-gendering all of those things and offering many different protective, how would I say, Anne? Protective pieces of equipment, I guess. I don't know. So the UN Pride, yeah, girl, go.
I was gonna say that's great. Thanks.
Okay. UN Pride Committee, we are creating campus climate programs to raise awareness, microaggressions and their negative effects. The Office of EDI, UN Pride, and OREA together, we're reviewing equity, diversity, and inclusion related policies and strategies, including communication strategies, and identify ways to enhance the commitments to fostering 2SLGBTQ+ inclusion, especially trans inclusion. You go, pal.
All right. And then, so you've heard us kind of mention a few times, and if you've come to our other workshops, you hear us talk about it all the time because we're excited about it, but it's just taking a while to get there. We are establishing a Safer Space certificate program to create a network of allies and accomplices committed to advancing inclusion on campus. So stay tuned for that. It is in development. It will be a self-paced online program that you can complete at your will. And then, again, a lot of people working together to develop workshops, resource materials, and other professional development opportunities to help prepare, not only our staff and faculty, but other instructors, teaching assistants, et cetera, anyone who kind of like is engaging with students on a regular basis. And then, Okay, so then my last question was what other recommendations you have for our campus, but I'm going to leave that for you to kind of think about because we only have 3 minutes left. And instead, I'm going to go directly to our commitment statement. So at the end of these workshops, and you've probably seen this before, we like to end with a commitment statement. So basically saying like, what can you do to make our campus safer and more inclusive for all staff, students, faculty, including 2SLGBTQIA folks. So if you just want to, I know that it's not a lot of time, and this is something that you can continue to think about and develop in your own time after this session and through future sessions that you might take with us. But just if you want to return to the Menti and add in your call to your own personal call to action, you can do that. It is anonymous, or you can just think about it and choose not to share. So I'll give you like a minute or two for that before we wrap up. And I am also trying to address some of the questions in the Q&A in writing. So I will try to do that while you think of your commitment statement.
Also, if folks want to go a little bit over the time limit, we understand that people in the audience or presenters may need to leave, so that's completely up to you. But we do acknowledge that if you want to go ahead and answer the questions, that's totally fine. But we also will send out the slides to everybody as well.
Thanks, Kate. I commit to calling out anti-queer macroaggressions whenever they occur. Excellent bystander skills happening here. Self-education, definitely, that's huge in all of the work surrounding equity, diversity, inclusion, decolonization, and indigenization. Keeping engaged and informed, awesome. Being a spokesperson in your department, that's awesome because I feel like, you know, we need like those, you know, like Jocelyn's a care champion on campus. Kind of unrelated, we have bright space champions in each department because when we're going through open learning, right? So when we're going through this transition period, we want people like, so the more that you can advocate within your own areas, the better. Like, that's awesome to hear. Yes, inclusive forms, that's definitely being worked on. Gender neutral washrooms, yep. Gendered language. And we have workshops around gendered language, like inclusive language and stuff like that as well. Paying a higher level of attention to language that is used during interactions. Yes, awesome. These are awesome commitment statements. Thank you so much for adding yours. It's still up, so you can add yours if you wish. But then I will just say it is 1 o'clock. So we thank you so much for taking your lunch hour to spend with us. We always love to see the community that gathers at our sessions and those who are engaged with EDI around the campus more generally. And thank you all for caring and engaging with us today.
Thank you so much, Ash, Jocelyn, and Anne for this presentation and for all the work that you do. And thank you also to our audience for their care and their engagement. It was really wonderful to see those commitment statements rolling in. And I just wanted to, on top of thanking you all, remind you of the seminar at 3 p.m. or the panel at 3 p.m. about migrant worker healthcare in Windsor-Essex County, which will be wonderful. It's at 3 p.m. until 4 p.m. on Teams, and that is going to be, again, part of our ADID week. And then finally, we have the Black Leadership and Excellence Program Trivia Night happening tonight in Katzman Lounge. Visit uwindsor.ca/VPEDI for more information. And again, thank you all for supporting EDID Week and EDID efforts on campus this week and every week.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Kayla, both for getting us here and for hosting this wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon, folks.